Brandon Russell, these two people who were arrested yesterday for saying that they were going to completely destroy Baltimore. Right. Their goal was to shoot up power substations. This is what Congressman Adam Kinzinger was worried about when he told Axios last year, I don't think that's a bridge too far to recognize. It's going to be armed groups against armed groups, targeted assassination and violence. Donald Trump yesterday used his Nazi-infested social media platform to push a renewed call for violence by Americans against Americans. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, quote, "It will likely get little attention to no attention today that the current frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination just told his supporters to start arming themselves for a civil war to overthrow the government just in case he loses." And sure enough, that's what Trump was retruthing over on his website. There actually is an active movement within the United States trying to start a civil war. They're armed, they are serious, they have shot up 9 power stations now across the United States. This was going to be the 10th. They tried to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. They tried to hang the vice president of the United States. They've already murdered numerous people across the country. You may not recall names like Pat Crusius and Anders Breivik or James Fields, but the members of a dozen different white supremacist groups in America can tell you the details of the lives of the El Paso murderer of 23 Hispanic people, the Norwegian killer of 77 liberals, mostly children, and the man who killed Heather Heyer and injured dozens others at the Jews Will Not Replace Us Charlottesville rally. These people think of themselves as students of how to start civil wars, and they know that you know, about 15% of Americans, many of them, in fact, probably the majority, certainly the majority of them white Americans, who were in the middle class 40 years ago when Reagan came to power, are no longer in the middle class. They know that ever since the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954 by the Supreme Court mandating for the first time in American history racially integrated public schools, that ever since that time there has been a freak out among white supremacists and racists in America that they can exploit. And this has, of course, also led to the movement that's very close to accomplishing its goals to destroy public education in the United States and replace it with racially segregated private schools. This is what they're all about. I mean, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie last year was saying, quote, the tipping point will come when, quote, 30 to 40% could agree that the American government was legitimate tyranny and needed to be thrown off. Those trying to bring down the American government need to have sufficient power without asking for extra permission. It should be right there and completely available to them in their living room in order to effect the change. So this guy calling for armed revolution against the American government, he is now on the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Federal Government, on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, on the Committee on the Judiciary, on the Committee on Rules, on the Committee of Transportation, on the Committee on the Judiciary. I mean, you know, Ilhan Omar, oh no, you can't have her. She's a black refugee. But Thomas Massie, no problem. Meanwhile, over at the Daily Caller, this was founded by Tucker Carlson yesterday. It leads with an op-ed, quote, "It's 2025. The United States is in chaos. Chinese super shoal soldiers roll in from Canada and criminals rule the streets. You could use a weapon of war, but the Democrats won't allow you to have one that isn't California compliant. The media told you guns are bad and that working out is toxic masculinity. But the Chinese look pretty fit and they have guns. So do the criminals victimizing you. Alas, all that critical race theory and TikTok are useless as they break into your home and kill you." Right. This is, you know, a real thing. These people thinking that violence and the threat of violence is going to bring about political change in the United States. And it started with that 1954 Supreme Court decision and the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan and his institution of neoliberal economics, his destruction of the American middle class, his taking us from a nation that was 1/3 unionized to about 10% unionized. All of those things together have basically destroyed the Today, it's about 20%. Why? Because we've had 42 years of Republicans constantly whining and complaining and trash talking the government of the United States. These people, hate our current government. They hate this idea of a so-called socialist government that has things like Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, housing supports, low-cost education. I mean, all of this stuff. It's just they're totally opposed to it, and this is where America is at. So what do we do about this? How do we step back from this precipice? I mean, when there's this shared sense of grievance, small things can trip off a big problem. So first, Americans have to trust that their democracy works. How do we do that? We roll back Citizens United, and we put into place an election system that is consistent across the country, like Canada has, Elections Canada, national standards for elections. Second, we have to, basically help out the people of all races who've been the victims of 42 years of Reaganomics. Other advanced countries do this by expanding union rights, expanding the social safety net, including free and low-cost medical care, free and low-cost college and trade school. I mean, when people have good jobs and income, they tend not to become terrorists. Our slogan should become, if Canada can do it, why can't America? And finally, and it pains me to say this as somebody who back in the 60s as a member of SDS was surveilled by state police and local police. But nonetheless, I think that the final step is that if we're going to avoid the possibility of a fascist takeover, as has happened in Russia, Turkey, Hungary, Egypt, and the Philippines, our state and local police and federal agencies need to start seriously ramping up their surveillance and infiltration of these domestic terror groups. America didn't ask for a homegrown right-wing terrorist movement. But now that it's here, we need to take it seriously. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. I want to share with you some thoughts on the State of the Union address tonight, Biden's economic accomplishments. Also, a whole neighborhood group of bystanders had to get together to protect a young black man armed with a cell phone from the police. Amazing story. Stick around. We'll be right back.
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Hartman University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people. and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. It is Friday. It's the end of the week. It's the beginning of Anything Goes weekend. What's on your mind today? We got a lot to talk about. We have one guest today. Dr. Feigl-Ding will be with us at the beginning of the second hour of our program. The epidemiologist and COVID expert. It appears that COVID is ticking back up again all across the country. Well, all across the world, actually. There's a new variant that seems to be getting around vaccines and things. We'll talk with Dr. Feigl-Ding about that. For the first hour of the program, if you think you've had a bad day, we have a new alert. This is an incredible story. I'll get to it in just a moment. Also, the shocking voter purge crisis of democracy revealed, my op-ed today. And a conservative case is emerging on how to disqualify Donald Trump based on the 13th or the 14th Amendment. And this is how it begins. These are two lawyers actually from the Federalist Society. I'll tell you all about that. And is January 2nd a good day for a trial? I'll lay out the details of what's going to happen or at least what we expect is going to happen now in Donald Trump's trial in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned in the top of our second hour, Dr. Feigl-Ding is going to drop by, and we'll have a lengthy conversation, actually. I'm assuming that there's a lot to talk about. It's been a long time since we've had him on about this new Eris COVID wave. Also, is the Republican Party actually invoking the Bible in defending razor wire covered barrels in the Rio Grande? Yeah, it turns out they are. Also, in the third hour of our program, that'll be the third hour of our program. Also in the third hour of our program, does America need a psychological defense agency? France and Sweden have both done this. I'll tell you about it in the third hour. And a Geeky Science, this is an astonishing new study that ties drinking sugary drinks every day to liver cancer. Yeah, liver cancer, serious stuff. Kill you dead. I'll tell you all about that in the third hour of our program. So, to start out, our if you think you had a bad day alert. This is incredible. This is from the New York Times. Peggy Jones was out finishing a day of yard work. This is an article by Cheng-Chi. Finishing a day of yard work on a 6-acre property that she and her husband own in Silsbee, Texas, when a snake fell out of the clear blue sky, wrapped itself tightly around her right forearm. She says, I immediately started screaming and swinging my arm to shake the snake off. I was screaming, Jesus, please help me, please help me. The snake wrapped itself tightly around her arm, even more tightly. It hissed and lunged at her face, at times striking her glasses. But then Mrs. Jones realized the snake, too, was an unwitting victim. A brown and white hawk flying overhead had fumbled and dropped the 4.5-foot-long snake onto Mrs. Jones. Whoa. The hawk quickly joined the fracas, swooping down to wrench its serpentine dinner from Mrs. Jones' arm. The hawk snatched, scratched, and jabbed at her arm 3 or 4 times to reclaim its meal, Miss Jones recalled. Each time the powerful talons slashed her forearm. At one point, the bird dragged Miss Jones' arm up into the air. On the 4th time, it successfully uncoiled the snake and flew away. Wow. She was treated for cuts and at the hospital. Her glasses were chipped, and her lenses had a liquid substance on it that was venom from the snake. Oh, my God. Don't do lawn work in Texas, I guess is the moral of this story. All right, well, we got to have some, I'm not sure levity is the right word for this, but it's an interesting story. All right, my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, much better than having a snake fall out of the sky and wrap itself around your arm, is titled The Shocking Voter Purge Crisis of Democracy Revealed. This is something that is very specific to people who live in blue cities that are located in red states. And that's the piece of the equation that has been largely missing from all the news reporting around all these voter suppression attempts, is that almost all of these voter suppression attempts are directed at people who live in blue cities in red states. I mean, you know, this is how so many red states remain red states, is by suppressing the vote of people in blue cities. Now, why do Republicans have to suppress vote? Why is this pretty much only happening in red states? Well, because, you know, most Americans aren't fans of Republicans' policies. Most Americans don't want more tax cuts for billionaires. Republicans do. Most Americans don't want more pollution and more fossil fuel emissions in the atmosphere. Republicans do. Most Americans don't want deregulation and the end of the federal agencies that protect our rights. Republicans want them gone. Most Americans don't want high-priced drugs. Republicans fight to protect the profits of the pharma industry. Most Americans don't want Medicare to be privatized. Republicans fight to privatize it. Most Americans don't want Social Security ended. Republicans have been fighting to end Social Security since it started in 1935. Most Americans don't want abortion criminalized. Republicans are now talking about a nationwide ban. Most Americans don't want birth control criminalized. Republicans are trying to, in 3 states so far, trying to criminalize birth control. In fact, Clarence Thomas has said the Supreme Court should reevaluate their 1965 decision, Griswold versus Connecticut, that legalized birth control. Most Americans don't want high levels of student debt. The Republican Party loves it. In fact, they took Joe Biden to court and won to try to stop his reducing student debt by $10,000 a person. Most Americans don't hate on black and queer people, but the Republican Party has made this the cornerstone of their agenda. Most Americans don't support the Republican war on unions or their war on working people or the Republican war on the minimum wage, you know, trying to keep the minimum wage low. But, you know, so the bottom line is Republicans know that Americans don't want what they're pushing. Right? Americans just don't want it. So how do they stay in power? Suppress the vote. Prevent people who might vote Democratic from voting. It's very simple. They do it a whole bunch of different ways. Did you know that in the election on Tuesday of this week, in Ohio, in the 2 counties in Ohio, particularly in one, Cuyahoga County, I'm not sure, I don't know that much about Summit County, but in 2 counties in Ohio that have very large black populations, 5 days before the election, the Republican Party changed polling places. This is from, there's a couple of tweets here. The Ohio GOP is playing "Your polling place has moved" with 47,000 voters in the largest African-American voting county in Ohio just 5 days before the election. Right. The fact that this little trick, making it hard for 47,000 black people in Ohio to vote this week, got no mention in the media, means that you can expect to see this happening in every blue city and every red state in America this fall and particularly in fall of 2024. But that's just the beginning. Knowing that working class people are paid by the hour and they can't afford to take hours off work, in blue cities located in red states, every year or every election year, we are treated to long lines, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hell, in Georgia, there were lines that were 10 hours long in blue cities. Now, in the rural areas and in the red cities, it typically takes 10 minutes to vote in Georgia, but 10 hours in Georgia to vote. That's not an accident. That's Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger suppressing the vote. Similarly, many red states have imposed draconian penalties on people conducting voter registration drives. The League of Women Voters is now suing Florida, Tennessee, Texas, and Kansas because they've had to stop doing voter registration drives in all 4 of those states because Republicans don't want any more new voters. But the big kahuna here is purging voters. This, by the tens of millions every election cycle, this is where the GOP finds their best results. This is a quote from this new Demos report that just came out. Quote, "Between the close of registration for the 2020 general election and the close of registration for the 2022 general election, states report removing 19,260,000 records from their voter registration rolls. This is equal to 8.5% of the total number of voters who were registered in the United States." Now, as you know, was pointed out in the dissent in the Husted versus Philip A. Randolph Institute, if I'm remembering it correctly, a Supreme Court case. This is the one that legalized caging back in 2018. 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court. In the dissent in that case, whoever wrote the dissent, I think it was John Paul Stevens. I'd have to go back and look. But the dissent points out that on average in America, 4% of people move every year. But here you have nationwide, 8.5% of all the voters in America were removed from the voting rolls leading up to the 2022 election. Leading up to the 2018 election, between 2016 and 2018, it was 10%. Now, if most of this voter removal is happening in red states, that means that in red states, it might be 20% of the registered voters are being removed. And they're mostly being removed in black areas or in big cities or in college towns, which means that it might be 30-40% of Democrats that are being removed. This is happening in fact, this is, again, from this report, or this is from a report by the Brennan Center. The median purge rate over the 2016 to 2018 period in jurisdictions previously subject to pre-clearance. In other words, red states that have blue cities. The median purge rate was 40% higher than the purge rate in areas that are not covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. 40% higher. And then there's caging. This is where they knock you off the voting rolls if you don't send back a postcard. That was legalized in that that Husted case that I just mentioned. Another strategy is called strict signature matching. This is the Republican Party is trying to field 50,000 election volunteers, and what they will do is when you mail in a ballot, which more Democrats do than Republicans, they compare the signature on the envelope with the signature on your voter registration card. And if they don't perfectly match, or if a middle initial is missing or anything like that, then these Republican vote observers will challenge you, and your vote will go into the provisional ballot box, and it won't be counted until you show up in person. They're going to be doing this in every poll, in every blue city, in every red state in America. You can count on it. So if you live in a blue city in a red state, get ready, because all hell is going to break loose in a year and a half when the November 2024 election comes up. Double check your voter registration every couple months, and in particular, double check it the weeks before the close of voter registration, because that's when they love to knock you off. It's like a week before it's too late to register. So by the time you figure out you've been knocked off, it's too late to re-register. Check your registration.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Forewarned is forearmed. Pass it along to your friends in red states. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Chris in Littleton, Colorado. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I just wanted to say climate change disaster will not just increase, it will multiply unless we stop pumping billions of megatons of carbon into the atmosphere.
I agree, and I think
that
I don't think that we're going to see the increase in these crises. I don't think it's going to be a linear increase. I think it's going to be a log increase. I think we're going to see it every couple of years. It's going to increase by an order of magnitude.
And scientists say we must reduce carbon pollution by 50% by 2030. That's 6 years from now.
Yep. And we got to take it to zero by 2050.
The world's been increasing carbon pollution every year, including 2022.
Yep. And it's starting to bite us bad now.
70% of carbon pollution is caused by individual people's gas autos and gas homes.
Yeah.
Each one of us needs to take action and drive electric cars and electrify our homes.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And work with your local authorities, your local political power structure, to try to green the power source that's feeding your home. I mean, I have an electric car and I live in an all-electric home. We don't even have a gas line that comes into our home. And we get all of our electricity from the Bonneville Dam. So, I'm literally not producing any carbon when I drive, when we air condition our house, when we heat our house. But most of America does not live in that situation. So, more of us need to. I'm with you. Chris, brilliant. Thank you very much. Rolando in Richmond, Texas. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, Rolando, that's correct.
Hey, what's up?
Okay, yeah, I caught this yesterday on Yahoo Finance that Harvard is actually showing their grad students how to apply for food assistance. And it just reminds me of back then when, you've talked about how taxpayers are subsidizing low-paid workers like at Walmart. Companies get away with it. And that's just pretty sad that they can't even pay grad students enough that they can eat. Because I know they get billions in endowments. Because my son's at Texas Christian University. As a matter of fact, we're driving him up there. And that TCU got $2.4 billion in endowments last year. Wow. So the money's there.
Oh, yeah.
But see, here they are, again, taxpayer having to subsidize, and of all things, a private university.
Yeah, and when you say grad students, I think most people don't realize what you're talking about. If you've got your bachelor's degree and you're working on your master's degree, my son did this when he was at college in Georgia. You can get a job with the university, basically, as a teacher for people who are still working on their bachelor's degrees. Under the supervision of a real professor, but you're actually teaching the classes. And the university pays you for this, but they pay crap wages. I mean, it's a joke what they pay.
Well, actually, I think the union over there is trying to go ahead and work and try to get their, get their pay raised up.
That's good.
But like I said, this is a private university. I know they're getting billions because, like I said, TCU is getting, we know that. I looked that up.
Harvard has one of the largest endowments in the country. I think Yale has the largest.
Exactly. And, that just stinks. That's just disgusting. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, you shouldn't be on food stamps if you're working for a university with a $5 billion endowment or $2 billion, whatever it may be. Rolando, thank you so much for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. It is, 22 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday or weekend. We'll be back with you. More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist. But we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. Welcome back. So a conservative case emerges for keeping Donald Trump off the ballot. This is fascinating. These are two lawyers. Their names are William Baud of the University of Chicago, Michael Stokes Paulson of the University of St. Thomas, who are members of the Federalist Society. And this is from a piece in the New York Times the New York Times by Alan Liptak, titled "Conservative Case Emerges to Disqualify Trump for Role on January 6th." And, of course, they're referring to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says that anybody who's participated or given aid and comfort to people participating in an insurrection against the United States may not hold public office. And, they say it's unquestionably fair to say that Trump engaged in the January 6th insurrection through both his actions and his inactions. They point out that, he He set out to overturn the result of the election. He tried to alter the vote counts by fraud and intimidation, his call to Rafson Purger. He encouraged bogus slates of electors. He pressured the vice president to violate the Constitution. And he called for the march on the Capitol. And then he remained silent for hours while people were literally being killed at the Capitol building. I mean, that's an insurrection by any definition. And the conclusion of this article, Donald Trump cannot be president, cannot run for president, cannot hold office unless 2/3 of Congress decides to grant him amnesty, which is what the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says. They also go on to point out that Section 3's disqualification rule may and must be followed, applied, honored, obeyed, enforced, carried out by anyone whose job it is to figure out whether someone's legally qualified to office. In other words, this isn't just for a court or the Supreme Court or something like that. This is up to the election administrators in every single county and every single state in the union. These people swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and the 14th Amendment is part of the Constitution. Professor Calabresi said these administrators must act. He wrote, quote, Trump is ineligible to be on the ballot, and each of the 50 state secretaries of state has an obligation to print ballots without his name on them. He also said that any who do print a ballot with Trump's name on it can be sued. Very interesting. I mean, again, 2 Republican Federalist Society members. Frankly, I don't think this is political. I mean, I've been looking for the kind of Chris Christie moment when the fever breaks, when the entire Republican Party goes, whoa, and realizing that they're just going to go down in flames if Trump is their candidate, and if abortion is their issue. I mean, they've got to learn from this, right? But this isn't that. These are actual conservative judges looking at the law. It's fascinating. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I've got to give you the details on what happened this morning in the courtroom, and I'll pick up your phone calls right after this break.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from Chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is Chapter 1. I sit in a living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she has lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. But becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. So Trump's lawyers went into court this morning in Tanya Chutkan's courtroom in Washington, D.C., and the government, Jack Smith, was asking for a blanket protective order. In other words, Trump can't talk about witnesses, jurors, or evidence. And the judge limited that somewhat, but she also said, this is a criminal case, I'm quoting, the need for this criminal case to proceed in normal order and to protect the integrity of the process means there are going to be limits on the defendant's speech. So, she said, if that means he can't say exactly what he wants to say about witnesses in this case, then that's how it's going to be. Now, meanwhile, Jack Smith is saying he wants the trial to start on January 2nd of next year. The Trump people are saying, whoa, no, we want it after the election so that Donald Trump can get elected president and pardon himself, which, So, the Speedy Trial Act, to the best of my knowledge, there was not a decision made on this morning. That's something that'll come down the road. But what Jack Smith laid out, came right out and said it. They're quoting from the United States versus Gambino. This was in 1995. It was a Second Circuit Court case where they ruled, the Second Circuit ruled, quote, the public has as great an interest in a prompt criminal trial as the defendant. See, Trump and his lawyers had been arguing on television, and in fact, Jack Smith cited their television interviews in his petition to the court, or whatever it's called. They have been arguing on television that the speedy trial provision and the speedy trial law and the speedy trial defined in the 6th and 7th Amendments was only for the purposes of protecting the rights of the defendant. And Jack Smith comes along and says, no, we also need a speedy trial to protect the rights of we the people, of the victims of this crime. This is what Jack Smith wrote. He wrote, it is difficult to imagine a public interest stronger than the one in this case, in which the defendant, the former president of the United States, is charged with 3 criminal conspiracies intended to undermine the federal government, obstruct the certification of the 2020 presidential election, and disenfranchise voters. So there you go. The government says that they expect, if they get a January 2nd court date, that they will have it wrapped up by February, that it'll take 4 to 6 weeks to present their case to a jury. The Trump defense has basically as much time as they want. There's no limit for their defense. But this schedule, which has defines meetings on September 25th, October 16, October 26th. These are all for various motions that just, procedurally have to happen to lead up to a criminal trial. October 25th, November 13th, November 27th. This is right around Thanksgiving, right? December 4th, December 8th, December 11th, January 2nd. So it looks like at least the prosecutors, the Jack Smith people, intend to work right through Thanksgiving, right through Christmas, to make this thing happen on January 2nd. And of course, the Trump people are just hysterical about it. One of the other arguments that the Trump people have made, the Trump lawyers have made, is that the government had 3.5 years to come up with this, and Donald Trump has only had a week or a couple weeks. Well, Jack Smith again rebuts that, saying no. First of all, it wouldn't be 3.5 years. It's only been 2.5 years since Joe Biden became president. So they've had 2.5 years to look at this, number one. And number two, they said that, Donald Trump has known about this stuff since June of last year, because that's when virtually all of the evidence that Jack Smith is going to be using was presented to the entire nation, including the defendant Trump, by the January 6th committee. So keep an eye on this. This is going to get entertaining at the very least. All right, let's pick up your calls here. Russ in Hickory Hill, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind today?
Thank you, Tom, for taking my call. Why I called, I wanted your opinion. I hear this no labels is in your state, Colorado, or fighting in Arizona. How come Robert Kennedy's name ain't popping up with no labels in Ohio, Texas, Florida? Because, yesterday, Tom, I was stunned to hear this. Biden is more popular than Donald Trump. He's more popular than Obama was in his run for re-election. 89-10 among the Democratic base.
Yeah.
I am stunned. But what I want to see is North Carolina. He won by 72,000. If we can cut that down by maybe 28, that state will turn blue.
Yeah.
Because I don't see Robert Kennedy's name. If they're so, fair and balanced, how come his name ain't in Ohio, Texas, or Florida, or Oklahoma?
Well,
it seems like they're in blue states.
No, first of all, you need to separate no labels from the Democratic Party. Bobby Kennedy is running in the Democratic primary against Joe Biden and Marianne Williamson. And No Labels is a whole separate political party, and they're talking about putting up a fusion ticket of a Democrat and a Republican. In all probability, Joe Manchin and John Huntsman, although there have been a few other names. But I think that Bobby Kennedy is too far out of the mainstream for No Labels. They're looking for what they call mainstream candidates. And, you know, Bobby with his anti-vax stuff and his, you know, anti-Ukraine stuff, he's just too far outside the mainstream, I think, in the opinion of the No Labels people. They want a candidate that will pull votes away from Joe Biden. In fact, they've come out and said, you know, if Trump is not on the ticket, that they may not do this. It's clear that they're trying to get Donald Trump reelected. So, you know, that's the distinction, Russ. Russ, thanks a lot for the call. You wanted to make a point?
Yeah. I was just saying, you talk about Joe Manchin. Tom, he ain't exactly going to be the most favorite guy for a Democrat to vote after what he's done in the Senate with his filibuster.
Oh, I know.
You might as well put him and Kristen Sinema as partners.
Yeah.
Why don't they just go that way?
That would be a very unpopular ticket. They're looking for a popular ticket, but I agree. Manchin, I don't know if you caught the news yesterday that Manchin's talking about leaving the Democratic Party. I guess he's been out of the headlines for a week and a half, and he's just itching to get back in. So, you know, he had his people drop that story. Russ, thanks for the call. G-Ra in Chicago. Hey, G-Ra, what's up?
Oh, man, this is so great to be able to just touch you. Yeah, well, what's up is I would like to, what the black community means when it says the word woke.
Okay.
Okay? Woke. Wake up the black spirit, some call the Holy Ghost, and be not afraid.
Okay. I mean, my understanding is that the phrase woke goes back to, the guy who popularized it was Leadbelly back in the 20s or 30s, where he did a whole song, and he ended the song by saying, stay woke. And he was talking about, you know, people in the South who were fighting for civil rights. And by stay woke, you know, look out, there's people trying to kill you.
Right. But like in the 60s, when the black community was doing it, was saying, wake up to what's happening around us now. It's wake up your spirit. So, because what they're afraid of is the spirit, like John Coltrane and Pharrell Sanders and Bob Marley. That spirit that comes out in our art and our you know, the things that we bring about physically. Yeah. And the Holy Ghost is what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the ghost part of it. They think that the ghost is something that's scary, but it's something that's helpful. It helps the black community once we're woke to it, because the Holy Ghost is what the community has to wake up to, which is our spirit.
Yeah.
And once we wake up to our spirit, that's what the fear is about. The fear comes in when the black community say, like, we're going to wake up and move forward. And they don't want us to move forward. They want us to move backwards. And the way for us to stay forward is to stay awake.
Yeah. Well said, G-Ra. I love hearing John Coltrane's name. It's been too long since I've listened to his music. What a genius. G-Ra, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Your points are very well made. Thank you. Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's on your mind today?
Well, I want to talk about the whole 14th Amendment thing that, I think I might have said to you earlier, is not, I just wanted to let everyone know that, this should have been done ever since January 6, 2021, or at least after the January 6th committee concluded their investigation. There should have been, yes, people have been talking about it, but how come no major groups, especially the Democratic Party, especially, because, they should want to win by taking out Trump, have not filed these lawsuits under the 14th Amendment barring him from public office? What else are they waiting for? Now they have an indictment that spells it out for them that Trump, engaged in an insurrection on January 6th.
Yeah.
So they could just put that into evidence, along with other statements, from January 6th, committee saying, hey, Trump cannot run in public office in 50 states, do lawsuits based on that. send letters to every secretary of state of every state to, bar him from office. Why don't they try that? I don't understand why.
Just ask yourself, what would the GOP do? I mean, if Joe Biden had tried to incite rebellion against the United States, would the Republican Party have tried to keep him off the ballot? Hell yes. Maybe they're waiting for people like you, Alejandro, to independently sue. I mean, anybody can sue for example, you could sue the Secretary of State there in Florida and say, you shall not put Donald Trump on the ballot. They would have to defend that.
Well, I am thinking about that. I mean, before I do that, I would like to send a letter first to the Secretary of State, the easy way, right? Send him a letter, citing evidence, say, hey, Donald Trump engaged in a coup attempt, and wait for their response, and then, we'll see what happens with that. And then, yes, try to maybe ask ACLU or any other groups to see if they're interested in taking this lawsuit. Because, I don't want to stick my head out by myself. I want a whole coalition behind me to take. Well,
have you reached out to the ACLU and seen to ask them if they have any plans like this that you might be able to help with?
No, not yet. Just brainstorming this now. So, but now.
Well, if you do, let me know. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
I mean, it seems like, this is the kind of thing that my guess is that the Democratic Party is not doing it because they don't want to be seen as, trying to cheat to win an election, essentially, which is how it would be perceived by Republicans, and some independents. But if the ACLU does it, if Alejandro does it, hey, all bets are off. Alejandro, thanks for the call. Good luck. Good luck. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Weekend. Picking up your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. And welcome back. Ron in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to talk to you about last Friday. You mentioned a number of Trump businesses that had failed.
Yeah,
I have to take issue. I take issue with using the word failure to describe Trump's bankruptcies. Over a 20-year period, Trump's businesses filed for bankruptcy 19 times.
So you're suggesting that he's doing this as a business strategy rather than as the consequence of a failure?
Absolutely. The Taj Mahal Casino opened in 1990 with a total cost of $1.1 billion. The financing included $7 million in junk bonds at 14% interest. It filed for bankruptcy the next year in 1991.
To get rid of the junk bonds.
It reemerged from the Chapter 11 as the Trump Hotel, Casino, and Resorts, which then filed for bankruptcy in 2004 with $1.8 billion in debt.
Wow.
And again.
So wait a minute. He got out of $1 billion the first time, then he got out of $1.4 billion the second time?
1.8 the second time.
1.8?
Yeah, Chapter 11 bankruptcy doesn't close your business down. It allows you to restructure.
Correct. It's called reorganization.
Right. And again, in 2009, it filed again in 2009 with an additional $500 million in debt.
Wow.
You
wonder who got burned. Was it individual bondholders, or were there banks involved here? Is this why American banks wouldn't loan to him, because they got screwed in these cases?
I think in the junk bonds there were a lot of individuals that held a lot of those bonds.
Yeah, probably.
Or groups, hedge funds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Again, it's unimaginable that a casino can go bankrupt in the first place, but Trump's casino went 15 years bankrupt 3 times and lost $3 billion.
Which means that basically $3 billion was probably transferred out of the casino and into Trump's pockets.
Exactly.
I mean, the old trick is you pay yourself a huge salary out of your own business, and then you bankrupt the business after you've drained all the money out of it. Yeah,
just like they pulled vast amounts of money out of the 2016 and 2020 and now the 2024 campaigns and the inauguration fund and contributions to stop the steal.
Yep.
In addition, between 1991 and 2010, 16 other Trump businesses filed for bankruptcy. Trump Airline, Trump Magazine, Trump Vodka, Trump
Although
Steak.
a lot of those were businesses that actually Donald Trump didn't own. They were businesses that were licensing deals.
Yeah, I have to question exactly whether those licensing deals were real or ghosts.
Interesting. Yeah. Or whether they were just, I mean, you know, people jumped into it thinking that the Trump name was going to be the ticket to, you know, riches and prosperity, and it turned out that it wasn't. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it just didn't work. But
Anyway, if you look at all these bankruptcies, you know, I
where are
think
you getting your
Trump is
information?
Usually, I went back in 2015 when he was nominated for the Republican ticket. A friend of mine at work said something to the effect of, well, what the United States really needed for a president was a successful businessman like Donald Trump.
So you did your own research here. Ron, I'm out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And you know, climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. Voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything, and public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls on Anything Goes Weekend here. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I'm Tom. The question I want to ask, if the Secretary of State keep Trump off the ballot, if they keep him off the ballot, can the people still vote for him as a write-in?
Yeah,
that's one thing.
It depends on the state, on the rules in the state. And I'm not sure that all states allow for write-in candidates. It may be that they do. I just don't know. These are state laws as opposed to federal laws. And I don't know how standardized they are. But if write-in ballots are legal, then, yeah, people can write his name in. But if he's elected, he can't hold office. So.
That's a good thing. And you know what, Tom? I heard this on the Joe Madison show. He can't even vote for himself because he got a felony
in Florida. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's crazy.
So, Tom, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Now, if you was a Republican right now, running for president, I'm going to ask you this question, and you had to debate Joe Biden, President Biden. What debate would you have for them? Because you can't really debate them. Now, I want Thom Hartmann to be the Republican nominee.
If I was a Republican running against Joe Biden, I would do everything I could to avoid debating him because, I mean, what can a Republican say? Yes, we want to throw women in jail, you know, et cetera. Hey, Tyrone, you still there? I think we lost Tyrone. All righty, Skip in Muskegon, Michigan. Hey, Skip, what's on your mind today?
You were talking about a fellow was saying how the churches, the Republican churches, I suppose I could say, were not liking the way their ministers were talking about Christ.
Yeah.
And that goes back to when I told you before that about 80% of the churches aren't really Christian churches. And they really don't know scriptures.
I agree.
But if you were to read John chapter 11, and when you get down to, let me see, the end of it, which would be 56 and verse 57 and replace the people of the temple and the Pharisees with Republicans, and now slowly read that chapter.
Is this the story of where Jesus comes into the temple and drives out the money changers?
No,
okay.
no.
I'm not familiar with exactly where you are here in the Gospel of John.
No, this is when Christ comes to bring a very close friend of his back to life.
Oh, Lazarus.
Yes.
Right.
And if you slowly read it, you see the love that Christ has for us. And you see during this, when he's explaining to people how he can do this, and people aren't understanding it, how he's getting upset with us, but he still goes on, does what he does. And then at the end of the chapter, what happens? The church says, oh, we got to get rid of this guy. Yeah. He's going to take our money from us, and we're going to put us out of business, and we got to get him. And, they're the ones that we got to get him executed. And this chapter right here, in a nutshell, is America today, because these Pharisees are the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And we are Christ. We are his. Christ told the Apostle Paul that there's going to be people that assume that they're Christians, aren't going to like their death. And there's going to be people, and I say Democrat, atheists, who don't believe in me, but because they are good people, they're not going to have it bad in death.
Right. Yeah, setting aside the theology, I think your analogy, comparing the Pharisees to Republicans is probably a pretty good one. I'd be more specific. I would say that the Pharisees are people like Franklin Graham. They're these right-wing people who claim to be Christians while they're multimillionaires and they're raking in the cash. Skip, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's Anything Goes Weekend. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price, too, for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never, ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side. The referee's blowing the whistle for you. The arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. We are hearing reports. There was an article in the Washington Post this morning. It's kind of all over the media now that COVID is popping back up again, and it's popping up all over the world, and it's popping up in various forms. And, well, I wanted to get the straight scoop here on what's going on and where we've been and where we might be going. And so our old buddy, Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, the epidemiologist, senior fellow with the Federation of American Scientists, the first whistleblower of the COVID pandemic, a former faculty member and researcher at the Harvard Medical School and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, is on the line with us. His Twitter handle or X handle is Dr. Eric Ding, DRERICDING, or at FA Scientists. Dr. Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the program. I'm so glad you could join us. I'm seeing these reports of an uptick in COVID. What's going on here, and how consequential is this?
Yeah, happy to be back. Wish it wasn't always surging COVID that brings me back.
I'm with you.
Right now we've been watching. There's this increase in wastewater for a while. That's been going on for over 2 months almost. But some people didn't believe that was any signal. But we know that whenever that surges, caseloads follow because actual tested cases are quite low. There's almost very little testing. So Walgreens has one of the best state-by-state testing databases. And the positivity on the Walgreens database is just completely skyrocketing. And moreover,
positivity meaning the percentage of people who think they might have it who come in and get tested.
Percentage of people who test that get a positive result are surging.
Right.
And obviously, but that's also a function of how many people are testing.
Right.
They're, unlike before, a lot of people aren't testing anymore. So among the limited samples that we're now testing, the positivity is surging. So it is one of the signals. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, like hospitalizations have also increased. Not exponentially, but quite sharply in New York and some other southern states like Georgia and in many parts of the country. The data now, hospitalizations only released by HHS like once a week. Mm-hmm. We don't have daily reporting anymore, unfortunately, because of cuts, which is also very sad. But we know it's surging, but we should get the latest update soon. And the question is, how bad? Because we know it's going up. Everything's going up. Hospitalizations are going up. Positivity is going up. Wastewater's already been up. And we think it's due to this variant because this EG5, which we nickname it Eris, this EG5 variant is now pretty much soon to be dominant. It's now, I think, 17% as of the latest CDC report, and it's going to only likely go up even higher.
So what's unique about Eris? If most of this is attributable to one particular variant, is it that variant is more competent at getting around our immune defenses?
It is, right. So there's many variants that's been floating around, but again, always there's one winner that eventually emerges that is better than the rest, and that is the one that takes over. And so presumably, just like many previous variants, this one must be much more reinfection prone. Basically, previous immunity either to vaccine or previous infection does not protect you anymore. It's also a little bit of waning, but if it's waning, all COVID should be surging, but Eris is surging the fastest. So we think it's not just immunity waning, it's actually much more penetrant against your past immunity in the wall. Basically, in this thing, the fastest sprinting variant, it's the best pole vaulting climber variant. And so, probably vaccine efficacy is going to drop a little bit. Again, that also means previous infection protection. I think that's why I think people have to be very cognizant that, I tell people, if you were dropping masks before, you need to remask again in really crowded places, as in,
like airports,
closed trains, airplanes, when you're riding an Uber, because you don't know who else was in that taxi before you, right? And similarly, nightclubs, so please avoid that, and we really need to be mindful of ventilation because, I sometimes carry a CO2 monitor with me, and outdoor air is around 400, 450, and indoors, anywhere the CO2 rises quickly, and especially in schools, we know that there's not enough fresh air because many buildings don't have enough fresh air. And without fresh air, airborne transmission. And again, this protects you against not just COVID, but RSV, flu, many other viruses that are airborne. So I just feel like we need to raise the alarm a little bit and say, hey, this is the end of the summer. It's not the winter surge, but it's coming back. And what worries me is that, usually there's always a surge in the winter, sometimes worse than others. But to get a surge in the summer, that's very unusual because people are outdoors so much, right? But maybe with the heat, people going inside with the air conditioner, that could have the opposite effect when the heat is too hot. Right. It's like this indirect effect of climate change. When the weather's like 70 degrees out, everyone goes out. When it's, freezing, people stay in. But when it's 100 or 90 or 100, 110 degrees, people go back indoors again. So I think it's also might be a function of the heat and people spreading them more indoors because of the pressing heat outside. I think they're all really important factors.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've over the last year, I've taken a couple of flights, and I've noticed that some of the airports, like here in Portland, we've got a really modern airport. And just walking through the airport, you can literally feel air blowing on you everywhere you go all the time. I know they upgraded the air circulation system after COVID, in addition to it being a very modern airport. On the other hand, when I went through JFK, I think it was, or maybe it was Newark. No, it was JFK. The air was so still. I mean, I walked through an area where there were probably 300-400 people, and the air was so still that you could smell people's perfume from 5 and 10 feet away. I mean, it was just, there was no air circulation. And I put on a mask, and this was months ago when nobody was wearing masks and everybody thought COVID was over. And I put on a mask, going through that part of that airport just because I just didn't feel safe. Yeah. And it wasn't even COVID. I mean, I just didn't want to get the flu, for God's sake.
Yeah, I think that's a right radar to have, because anytime the air gets stale, it gets a little dank, it means there's no turnover of the air. The HVAC isn't running, the outdoor air is not replacing it. So anytime I feel the air is getting stale indoors, I know that this is a risk, especially if there's a lot of people. So I mask up then, and I like many people, scientists, we carry this CO2 monitor. And by the way, CO2, it's shown, it's not just as a proxy of ventilation and therefore, airborne risk, but it's also known that if you're in a room for a very long time, higher CO2 levels decreases your cognitive function. Like this is a Harvard study. Your brain literally slows down for processing speed, verbal, math processing, and and when you do tests, the test accuracy is lower, and it's not like you have to be at like 3,000 CO2. You have this kind of decrease for every 500 unit increase. So like if outdoor air is 450, and right here it's like showing about 1,000. that's showing significant decreases in your cognitive function in when a room is not, well ventilated. So this goes beyond just COVID. If you want a fresh thinking, cognitively maximally functioning brain, you need to improve your ventilation.
There you go. That just makes perfect sense. We're talking with Dr. Erik Feigl-Ding. You can stay with us for a second, right here, Dr. Feigl-Ding?
Yep.
Okay, great. Correlation and causation are different things. Let's talk about that. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We're speaking with Dr. Erik Feigl-Ding, with the Senior Fellow of the Federation of American Scientists. So, Dr. Feigl-Ding, the old scientific cliche, correlation is not causation. I've been wondering about the impact of how rapidly, or at least the reports that I've read. I mean, please correct me if my understanding of this science is completely wrong, but how rapidly the protection of a vaccine wears off. I mean, we are now pretty much 6 months out from the last kind of major round of vaccines, and my recollection is that by 6 months you've got about a 70% decrease in immunity. Could this upsurge in COVID not so much be the consequence of a really competent virus at evading our immune systems, but rather simply that our immunity has waned?
Yeah, it's this immunity training that we have. This is the big open question. Like, it's a combination of if the virus mutates far enough that it falls out of the original coverage of the vaccine or your immunity that you develop from infection. And of course, your body sometimes forgets and tampers down on the antibodies. Because if your body produced the maximal antibodies for every single disease that it's ever seen, your lymph nodes will be the size of a basketball because your body just can't circulate. Your body has seen so many viruses, but if it haven't seen a certain virus in a while, it starts downregulating and basically expressing it less. But if it encounters again, usually sometimes it'll bring it back. The issue is some training. It's like some vaccines, once you're immunized basically almost for life. But some vaccines, your immunization lasts just a couple years. Right. And it depends on the virus and how it behaves. So I think it's possible that it's the immunity waning, because I think the reinfection rates, I've seen this data from New York as well as Italy, the reinfection rates are definitely going up, which means those who previously got infected are getting infected again. And if the reinfection rates are going up, that's a good sign that it's also I think it's a combination. It's not just the vaccine waning. Your body's whole reaction, the immunity that you develop, is also waning. So I want to make sure it's not just vaccines. Even if you're previously infected, you're not protected forever. And so this is what is causing this whack-a-mole. Why, every few months or a year or half a year, there's a new wave. It's a matter of time until a new variant emerges, and a matter of time until your immune system wanes enough that it gets to the tipping point that the virus will surge again. So the question is, of course, right now, is the severity. So we, compared to before, we have Paxlovid. We have some other drugs that are some semi-work as well. There's remdesivir that semi-works, but Paxlovid is still by far the best, reduces your risk of hospitalization by 90%. So, if we can get it into people quick enough, we can reduce the risk of hospitalization. Yeah. And the other thing is the other thing I've been batting is how bad will the surge be? Because the other thing is we've already, after 4 full years of this almost, a lot of the people who are really susceptible for COVID have already been kind of hit. Right. And I hate to say it, there is a survivor effect.
Let's pick this up on the other side of the break here. I've got to read a commercial side on the commercial side here. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a three-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. He came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the three steps. Number one, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them, along with massive gerrymandering. Number two, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities, while merging with one of the large factions of a church. And the billionaires in the country. And number three, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' Three-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. I was just asking the question, is it, correlation and causation, is it possible that the reason we're seeing this resurgence or this new surge of COVID is not that it's a brilliant new variant, but that, our immunity is waning because it's been a while since most people have had shots. And in fact, if you're not over 65, I think is the threshold, most people haven't gotten that second, bivalent shot. And you were talking about that. And also the kind of how the immune system gets trained. You want to pick that up?
Right. And I think it's trained. And I also want to point out that, some people say, oh, I already have a shot or two shots. I don't need a booster. Booster is booster sounds optional, right? But I always tell people that the booster is actually the best shot, because your first two shots bring your there was actually a Pfizer study on this. With two shots, your antibody levels go up to about 700, but after 6 months, it wanes to like 300 or so. But with a booster, this is an earlier study, but your third shot brings it up to over 2,400. So your antibody level protection is the most significantly increased after a third shot. So for those who haven't had a third shot, please, for the love of God, get at least the third shot. And the boosters that are coming out, they're preparing these new boosters tailored to XBB, but it's tailored to XBB.1.5. But XBB.1.5 right now is already on the waning, on the downtrend. The EG5, for example, is technically an XBB.1.9. It's another even further mutated variant, and hopefully it works against whatever the new vaccine that's already in production. And the other thing is they're making the new vaccine, instead of bivalent, which means it has two versions, the Omicron and the old. It was a BA.5 Omicron and plus the original Wuhan. Now they're saying, no, let's just dump Wuhan formulation altogether. We're just going to make it monovalent, just the new XBB.1.5. And they think that by training with the new versions, and dumping the old Wuhan 1.0 version, that's partly in the bivalent, your body will be better trained towards the new ones. It's kind of like it's time to teach your body a brand new version as opposed to teaching still partly the old one. And they think it will be more effective than the bivalent shot because it will be singularly focused on the new generation, the XBB generation of variants that we're now in. So I'm hopeful, but the problem is it's not here, and it's not coming here until at least November, I expect. And because of that, we're still in August. We're still like 2-3 months away. Right. I think we're we're all puzzling around of how bad will this be. Is this simply a summer surge because of the heat and people staying indoors because of the heat wave? Is it the waning, or is it the variant that therefore will even be worse? Or will we blow through a small wave and then, recover and it'll come back down without much of a hospitalization increase? This is like the big open question I've been asking. Everyone's talking about new variants, and I used to talk about variants a lot. I'm just being very more careful. Some people say, "Oh, don't worry, Paxlovid, blah 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 blah." But yeah, you know what? Paxlovid back in the old days, it was free. It was covered by the U.S. government. But in this new year, after May, Paxlovid, after the pandemic emergencies ended, Paxlovid and all these new boosters, by the way, are not going to be free. It's going to be free if you have insurance, but not everyone in America has insurance.
Right.
And the access is not as, test and treat like we used to have. So it's an open question of how bad it will be.
Right. No, I get it.
It hasn't gotten apocalyptically bad, but I think this will be a lesson that if it's bad now, by winter it will be even worse, because winter is always much worse for flu, cold and flu season.
We're talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. He's an epidemiologist and health economist with the New England Complex Systems Institute. And Dr. Feigl-Ding, we just have 30, 40 seconds left. I'm seeing low numbers for workplace participation and also problems with testing scores in kids. Can any of this be attributed to long COVID and possibly cognitive impairment from same?
Yeah, long COVID, of course, is the huge other third rail of how bad COVID will be beyond just a surge. The cognitive damage, the immune system damage, it is possible. It is possible. There is a lot of evidence for neurological damage. A lot of people have difficulty walking, have memory problems. And we just don't have enough study of how long it will last.
Right.
Is it a long-term thing? And then, of course, on the right wing, the others, they're saying, "Oh, it's because we locked up kids and shut down schools for so long."
Right.
No, that shouldn't be. Schools have been in for quite a while now.
Right.
That's not the reason. I think it's long COVID personally.
Okay, Dr. Feigl-Ding, thank you so much. Thanks so much for dropping by.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That was Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, epidemiologist and health economist with the New England Complex Systems Institute, the first whistleblower of the COVID pandemic. We'll be back.
It's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker, or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down, and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Weekend. Merrick Garland just appointed a special prosecutor, the guy who, this Republican appointee, this Trump appointee, who has been investigating Hunter Biden, is now going to have the status of special prosecutor with subpoena powers and all the powers that basically Jack Smith has. James Comer is saying that this is a cover-up. What? It actually increases the probability Hunter Biden will end up in prison. amazing. Comer still has found no evidence that Joe Biden had anything to do with this, although Hunter's behavior was probably, appears to have been pretty reprehensible, much like Richard Nixon's brother and Jimmy Carter's brother and, I don't know who else has. I guess that's it. But anyway, let's pick up your calls here. Robert in Seattle. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I just wanted a couple things. You were talking earlier about somewhere where the Republicans in these various cities were really clamping down on mail-in voting, where there's any mistake, It's just, to me, it's just another example of the Republicans trying to limit who can vote. They're trying to limit anybody that they don't think, on their side.
Yeah.
In Washington, we've had mail-in voting for years, and there's never been any problem.
Yeah, no, you guys have had it for over 20 years. We've had it for, I believe, over 25 years here in Oregon, and we've never had a problem, no scandals, no nothing. I mean, it's just, it works really, really well.
Yeah, it does.
So.
And the only other thing I was going to mention to you was I'm so disappointed with the Supreme Court. I don't want to name particularly anybody, but, it's you get on the Supreme Court and these people just get richer and richer and richer.
Yeah, you're talking about Clarence Thomas and his 5 billionaire buddies now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, none of these people were friends of his before he got on the court. I mean, that's kind of that's the flag. Is once you've got political power, suddenly a billionaire wants to be your best friend. If he wasn't your best friend before, he's not your best friend now. He's using you. But Clarence Thomas is perfectly willing to engage in that. He's willing to be used in exchange for these free vacations and stuff. Yeah, I get it, Robert. It's horrible. I agree. Thank you. Peter in Dothan, Alabama. Hey, Peter, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, that's good to hear you again. Yeah, I've been over the last several months when Congress and when they overturned Roe versus Wade, and then a lot of the state Republicans have changed their abortion ban rulings and that.
Right.
And what got me curious and thinking, and it's like I'm asking your opinion. Now, when they were going through the debt ceilings, and the Republicans were talking about trying to cut like people on the SNAP programs, and if they were getting any assistance, they wanted to take and cut out their programs. And if the Republicans are trying to save money, why are they increasing the amount of that the people in the population in the poorer states that can't afford these abortions, that are going to be looking for this assistance later on? And I don't understand what their reasoning is behind it. And I was glad to see in Ohio where they reduced that 60% threshold.
Yeah.
And it's like they want society to have a selection of poor people, but yet the government is going to have to pay for them, and they want to cut the programs. And I don't understand what the purpose is behind their logic.
It has to do with white babies, Peter. There has been, extensive writing about this. It's fairly easily found if you just do a search. You'll find a lot of it on white supremacist websites, but for years and years and years, it has been well known that the largest percentage, the largest number of abortions that are happening in America are being done by middle-class white women. And they're most likely to be able to afford an abortion. Hispanic women are generally Catholic. They're less likely to have abortions. They're more likely to have larger families. Black people, generally speaking, once they, in the middle class, upper middle class, their numbers are similar to white women, but it's, black people are only 17% of the U.S. population, number one. And number two, poor black women are actually less likely to have abortions than middle-class white women, simply because they don't have access to it. They can't get a ride at the clinic, whatever it may be. So what you have are white supremacists watching the browning of America, and they are hysterical about this. And in fact, there was a piece published in about Texas suggesting that looking at birth numbers in Texas, And it appears that over the last year, there's been somewhere between 10 and 30,000 additional babies born in Texas over what you would have expected this period of time. And those are presumably babies who were born because women couldn't get abortions. And they, overwhelmingly white.
Oh, is that because because what I think is because we know that the rich, they can go get abortions.
Right.
In the middle class, there's a lot that can get abortions.
That's right.
But there's the poor people of the black and the brown that can't get abortions.
But many of them couldn't get abortions before. I mean, yes, abortion may be legal in the state, but what the state governments have done, at least in the red states, what they've done is they've made it so you have to, first of all, there's only one abortion clinic in the whole state, so people have to travel. Then you have to go through the ultrasound rape. Then you've got to come back in 2 days and have a speech given to you, and then you've got to wait to the third day and come back to get the abortion. And that's expensive. You've got to rent a hotel, you've got to take time off work. And so, lower income people, and particularly black lower income people, just haven't been able to do that. So, I don't think it's the largest part of the anti-abortion movement. I think the largest part of it is Catholics and evangelical Protestants who are, trying to impose their religion on all the women in America. But a good chunk of the opposition to abortion, particularly within the Republican Party, is coming from white supremacists who are flipped out about white babies being aborted. That's the bottom line. Peter, thank you for the call. Kevin in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kevin, thanks for listening to KNYP. What's on your mind today?
Okay, yesterday we were talking about the giant kelp forests and the CO2 and what's happened to the kelp. I have a piece of that story, at least along the west coast of North America.
Okay.
So when kelp plants are born, or whatever you call it for kelp, they attach themselves to boulders. The part of the plant that is attached to the boulder is called the holdfast.
So it's like
abalone,
the root.
Yeah. Abalone and sea urchins eat the holdfasts, and then the rest of the plant just floats away and dies.
Uh-huh.
Sea otters eat abalone and sea urchins.
Right.
In the 1700s, the Russians devastated the sea otter population, so we thought they were extinct.
Oh, they were looking for pelts.
Yep. Then, because of that, the abalone and sea urchin populations are artificially high, devastating the kelp.
Oh, interesting.
In the 1960s, the sea otters reappeared in Big Sur, so they didn't get them all. Mm-hmm. And they're spreading, and they should be encouraged. Mm-hmm. Abalone fishers don't like sea otters
because they compete.
So they have a vested interest in them not spreading. If we had more sea otters, then we would possibly have a sport fishing industry because fish like the kelp forests.
Right, because it's perfect for the adolescent fish.
Yeah.
Where they can hide.
Everything is connected.
Yeah, there you go.
In a biological system.
Right. The great lesson.
Predators are important.
Yeah, it's the great lesson of biology and frankly, I think theology as well, and culture. That it's all one thing. Kevin, thank you. That's fascinating. It's a great little bit of geeky science there that I was unaware of. Thank you so much. Henry in Las Vegas. Hey, Henry, what's on your mind today?
The social security system. The social security system has a 5-year sunset rule. And that if, as long as we have a Democratic president, it's okay. But if we ever get somebody else in the White House, the Lord help us.
What you're talking about, Henry, you've got it half right. What you're talking about is the proposal that Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott made that all federal programs would sunset after 5 years or have to be renewed, by acts of Congress every 5 years, including Social Security. And that has not become law. It's merely part of the Republican wish list right now. That's the good news.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Henry. Good to hear from you. Marshall in Kego Harbor, Michigan. Hey, Marshall, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was wondering about Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he's an attorney, right?
He is.
Okay. Why the Supreme Court does not have a ethics rule, apparently, but the Bar Association does, don't they?
They do.
Why couldn't they go after Thomas? Because he's giving them a very bad name.
That's an interesting question. I wonder if he even has retained his law license. I don't think that a law license is necessary to be a judge. It's only necessary. In fact, in some states, you can be a judge without even being a lawyer. And so I'm guessing that, the bar revoking his law license may be a moot point if he hasn't practiced law. I mean, he's been on the court for 30 years. If he hasn't renewed his bar license, they have no power over him.
Yeah. Oh, well, just a thought.
I don't know. That's a great question to put to like Dean Obadala or, somebody like that who is actually an attorney. I'm not, but it just seems to me like that would be the case. I suppose they could censure him or condemn him at the very least, but I doubt any bar association wants to piss off a Supreme Court justice. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your show. It's been listening for years.
Thank you, Marshall. And thank you for the call. Nice to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls here on Anything Goes Weekend in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you in the water cooler wars. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Scott in Carborough, North Carolina. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. It's a complicated thing I'm getting ready to bring up, but it's about the cannabis laws in the United States. As you know, I won't go as far back as the Marijuana Tax Act that Timothy Leary got thrown out, or the LaGuardia report in the 40s that showed that it was a safe substance, and Francis Young, the federal judge, ruled that it was one of the safest substances he'd ever studied. But we now know, and we knew even back then, that Richard Nixon put it in Schedule 1, contrary to the definition of Schedule 1, which is dangerously addictive. And
wait a second, did Nixon do that, Scott? I thought that dated back to the 1930s.
Well, Congress did it under his presidency.
Oh, really? I didn't realize it was that recent. Okay, keep going.
It was in the 70s. That was his war on drugs, remember? And
I remember the war on drugs well.
Yeah, well, see, I'm almost 70, so I've been around a while. Anyway, what happened was, what was going on then? And I was at Carolina, UNCCH, Chapel Hill, in 71 to 75. Well,
yeah, you're right. It was May 1st, 1971.
Yeah, and right. And what was going on was the black folks were saying, we've had enough. And so there was a lot of black activists running around and black power and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of college students out protesting the Vietnam War. And it came out, which we already knew then, that Nixon did that to get them off the streets, to arrest people, even though he couldn't arrest people for being young and protesting the war or being black. So he put it in Schedule 1, where it remains to this day.
Right. Yeah, it was John Ehrlichman who told Dan Bloom, who was a reporter for, The Nation or something like that, or The Atlantic. Right. Anyhow, John Ehrlichman told Dan Bloom back 10, 15 years ago, before he died, he said, you want to know what was really going on? We had two enemies, the Nixon administration. We had the anti-war hippies and the blacks, and so we heavily criminalized marijuana and heroin so that we could disrupt their meetings, arrest their leaders, and go after them. He said it had nothing to do with the drugs. It had everything to do with the politics. He was very blunt about it.
Right. Yeah, and to bring it even closer to home, which I don't know how much time I got, and I won't give you too many details, but I was in Oregon in 1978, and I'd taken the first human service job as a staff at a place called Rainbow Lodge in McMinnville. I'm sure you know where that's at. Mm-hmm. Out on top of a mountaintop where it was a bunch of throwaway 16 and 17-year-old kids who had no foster parents and weren't going to get any, so they were pretty much incarcerated. And I was a young 20-something-year-old, and I already knew all this stuff. And anyway, one night I agreed to let them smoke weed, didn't give them weed, didn't give them money, didn't even know if they even did it. And guess what happened to me? Once it got referred, one of the staff members who also did other things that were illegal told DSS, and guess what happened? I got charged with a Class A felony, 20 years in prison.
Whoa.
Well, and here's what happened. When I met with my public defender, because I had no money, he said, well, you need to plead guilty to the Class B, 10 years in prison, because I'm not going to. And I tried to get him to, let's go to trial. No. So anyway, I pled guilty to that, and Kurt Rossman, the judge on the case, and John Collins, the prosecutor, sent me to prison, first offense, even though I was already in grad school.
Wow.
I was sentenced to prison in January of 1978. After Kurt Rossman, the judge listed 11 reasons, because I was honest with everybody. And guess what? Director already knew my attitude about weed. It was his. I bought weed from the family therapist and so on. But he said 11 reasons why, in the pre-sentence report they do before you go to felony, said I shouldn't get probation. Well, guess what? Sent me to prison, first offense. Sentenced me in January, but because I was in grad school studying sign language and working with the deaf, he said, well, you can show up in May.
Scott, I got 10 seconds. You want to finish the story for us?
Sure. In May, I went to prison in Salem, Oregon, in the penitentiary. And I had my life threatened for 4 months. 4 months later, the parole board met with me and said I shouldn't have been arrested, and they were all angry.
Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, oh, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015, what did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Taking your calls here. Anything Goes weekend. Chris in Chicago. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I did have a comment about, you're talking actually today even about Clarence Thomas, that he should be taken off of the Supreme Court with a lifetime appointment. And my wondering is, we still have Louis DeJoy in the post office, and he doesn't have a lifetime appointment. It's like...
I know, it makes me crazy. It just makes me crazy. But yeah, I would like to see Clarence Thomas resign. There's a number of Democrats now in the House of Representatives who have openly called for him to resign. He's, of course, not going to. He's a troll.
Right.
I mean, he and his wife are just trolls, and trolls on behalf of right-wing billionaires. They're gonna ride that privilege card as long and as far as they can. Chris, thank you for the call. Neil in Valvo, Illinois, or Indiana rather.
Yes, Tom.
Hey, Chris. Or excuse me, Neil. What's up?
Yes. A week ago Tuesday, you had a lady on, and she was talking about the self-checkouts in the grocery stores, and what it's going to do to the tax base. Those are jobs lost. But I'm a truck driver, and the automatic trucks are coming.
Yep.
Within 2 to 5 years, and I mean there's 5 to 7 million truck drivers, and I just don't see how we could afford to lose them from the tax base. And what are they going to do? I would like to get your opinion on that, because I work for a co-op in a small town, and that's all the jobs there are. I mean, these small communities are going to dry up.
Yeah, this is what has. This is kind of the history of labor, Neil. I mean, we went from buggy whips to automobiles, and the buggy whip makers went out of business. The people who knew how to drive horses went out of business. Not to make the analogy too harsh here, but we have to have, what we really need is a national industrial policy. Most other nations have this. To some extent, we did for many years. I'd say through Eisenhower anyway. And to the extent that we had any remnant of it, it got destroyed with Reaganomics. But we need to be asking the question. We're not going to be able to stop what they're calling progress. You're absolutely right. You're going to have one truck driver on the lead truck, and then you're going to have 2 automated trucks behind him. Eventually. And it's going to probably get even worse than that. But yeah, I mean, just from a safety point of view, I'm scared by that. But they're saying they can do it. But there has to be some way of figuring out how can we keep people employed as more and more jobs go to automation. I went to ChatGPT this morning and said, write an article in Thom Hartmann's voice about voting, just to compare it with the piece that I wrote today on voting. And it wrote a damn good piece. I mean, I could have published that piece. You've got newsrooms now that are talking about doing away with reporters. You've got, trucking companies that are looking at getting rid of truckers. You've got, grocery stores and supermarkets and big box stores that are getting rid of their clerks. Computers and automation and robots are replacing lots and lots of people. And they're replacing more people than the number of jobs that they're creating in manufacturing and servicing those robots. And and increasingly, a lot of these robots are actually made in China too, which is problematic. But we need a national industrial policy to deal with this. And the problem is every time you try to bring up something like a national industrial policy or manufacturing policy, the Republicans shoot it down. They will not even allow conversation about it. It's not something that they want. They're because they don't care about how many people are unemployed. They just care about how much profit is going to the very top, to industry and to the CEOs and the fat cats who pay their bills. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
like
go ahead.
In the 70s, we seemed to, when we went to self-service gas, we seemed to be able to absorb that, the loss of the service attendants at gas stations. But for like 3 to 5 million jobs, if my job goes out, that's going to affect 3 to 5 jobs in my area.
That's right.
I just don't think that our country can absorb it at a point like this. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much for your opinion, Tom. I appreciate your show so much.
Well, thank you, Neil. And I wish you the very best. I'm assuming that your peers in trucking are talking about. Is this a hot issue right now among truckers?
No, I'm probably the only one thinking about it, but it was really on my mind when the Canadians did their lockdown. It's like, you do a lockdown like that, and these trucking companies are going to put on the fast track to get these automated trucks going.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
That really worried me. But
okay, well, Neil, thank you.
Good thing nothing happened in the U.S. about that. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. Neil, thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you. I do appreciate it. We will be back on the other side of this. Why are the Republicans invoking the Bible to justify razor wire barrels in the Rio Grande to catch people who are fleeing persecution? What's with that?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
If you're a corporate...
We say fight back!
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of Anything Goes Weekend. A couple of interesting stories here to share with you before we get to your phone calls. First off, 22 Republicans in the House of Representatives have signed on to a motion filed in federal court to defend Governor Greg Abbott's placing razor wire and razor wire covered barrels in the Rio Grande River. And what they are citing in this motion that they have filed with the court is the book of Genesis, Noah's Ark. No, I'm not making this up. The basis of the complaint against Abbott is that the law in the United States says that navigable waterways cannot be impeded, and that the barrels and the razor wire are impediments that have been put into a navigable waterway. The argument that the Republicans are making is that the water levels in the Rio Grande are so low and the river hasn't been dredged in so long that nobody, there's no commerce going up and down this river any longer. Maybe there was at one point in time, but it is no longer a commercial river. And therefore, those rules about interrupting, the flow of potential flow of traffic on the river don't apply. I think it's a really weak argument, but here's where it gets really weird. Then they go on to say that you can't regulate navigable waters anywhere because everywhere is potentially a navigable water because it was during the time of Noah's Ark. Honest to God, this is literally what they're saying. Here, this is from a verbatim quote from their motion. Indeed, if one takes the book of Genesis literally, then the entire world was once navigable by boats large enough to carry significant amounts of livestock. Under the federal government's theory, these anecdotes would render any structure built anywhere in Texas an obstruction to navigation subject to federal regulation. This is nuts. Oh, man. So, Jody Arrington, Michael Burgess, these are the members of Congress who signed on to this. Representative Andy Biggs, Brian Babin, Roger Williams, Lance Gooden, Beth Van Dyne, Jake Elsie, Vern Buchanan, Chip Roy, Nathaniel Moran, David Reuser, Pete Sessions, Ronnie Jackson, Trump's former lawyer, Dr. Feigl-Ding, the guy who passed out happy pills to people in the White House. Sam Graves, Clay Higgins, Michael Cloud, Keith Self, John Carter, Jeff Duncan, and Kat McCamick. 22 members of the House of Representatives. Amazing. Meanwhile, Sweden is under attack from Russia. In fact, they are saying that this is the most significant attack that they have had since World War II. The Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, says this is the most serious security situation since the Second World War. And what is it? Russia is fielding an army of trolls pretending to be Swedish citizens, posting on Facebook and other social media, trying to inflame the Swedish people, and also trying to inflame people outside the country of Sweden, specifically in Turkey, to get Erdogan to refuse to allow Sweden to become part of NATO. And they're doing this by claiming that this the Quran was burned in Sweden, and therefore. And it turns out that the guy who burned the Quran, this is where the situation gets very, very bizarre. There's two stories about this. One is this guy who burned the Quran. His name was Rasmus Paludan. He's a far-right politician in Denmark who has Swedish citizenship. And he burned the Quran in January in front of the Turkish embassy. Turns out that he had a permit to protest in front of the Turkish embassy where he burned the Quran. Turns out that protest permit was paid for by a guy who worked for Russian media. Bing! That should tell you something. So that he burns the Quran, paid for by Russian media. Then Russian trolls go to Facebook in Turkey and in Turkish talk about how the Swedes are sanctioning the burning of the Quran. We shouldn't let Sweden into NATO. And now they're also in Sweden, and they're trying to tear Swedish society apart. They're trashing gay people. They're trashing the Swedish government. They're trashing climate change. They're, any little wedge issue that they can use. Public schools. This is all Russian bots. I believe it's Russian bots here in the United States as well. But in any case, what Sweden has done is they're fighting back. They have created, as part of their Ministry of Defense, their military branch of government, they have created what they call the Psychological Defense Agency. And they're fighting this information war against Russia. And the way that they're doing it, they're not going to the social media and saying, stop these bots, or these trolls, or both. What they're doing is they're outing them. They're identifying them. They are informing the Swedish people that they are under attack from Russia. Now, our Pentagon tried to do the same thing, or actually it wasn't the Pentagon, it was the Department of Homeland Security, tried to do the same thing here last year. The Biden administration proposed an agency within the Department of Homeland Security. It was called the Disinformation Advisory Board. It wasn't even actually an agency. It was just a group of advisors who were going to point out when the United States is under propaganda attack from Russia. And the Republicans got so hysterical about it, and Fox News pounded on this for weeks, that the Biden administration shut it down. Now, not only is Sweden doing this, France is doing this too, by the way. And I'm assuming other countries in Europe are looking at doing this. They note in this piece in the New York Times, the accusations have persisted online. This is, that Sweden is anti-Muslim, including on one YouTube channel with nearly 1 million subscribers, which is popping up all over the place on Russian state television. Surprise, surprise. The agency's director general, this is this new psychological defense agency in Sweden. He just said, what we are now seeing is a full-blown, full-scale war in Europe, and Sweden is not neutral. They note in the New York Times, Russian state media and online accounts have also amplified a series of protests. And then that's the burning of the Quran. Another story that was promoted across Sweden and across the Muslim world was that Sweden was kidnapping Muslim children and forcing them to eat pork. And they had video of this kid who looks, who's from Iraq, who looks Muslim, eating pork. And the video has just gone completely viral because the Russian trolls are pushing it all across the Muslim world and in Sweden. It turns out that the immigrant in question, his name is Mandian Sabian, he's actually not Muslim. He's a member of an ancient monotheistic faith in southern Iraq that reveres John the Baptist. And eating pork is just fine with him. But, you know, that doesn't matter. This is war. This is information war. We are in an information war here in the United States right now. And we need to recognize it. The director of operations for this psychological defense agency in Sweden, he says, the best way to protect a society against disinformation, if you live in a democratic society, is to increase awareness about the threats and your own vulnerabilities among the population so they make the right decision. And he adds, and that is the Swedish way. We need to do something like that. We really do. I'm telling you. I see this every day on social media, and it's gotten to the point where it's fairly easy to identify the Russian trolls. Although I'm guessing that there's probably Iranian trolls and North Korean trolls and Chinese trolls. I don't know. But boy, do I have my read my social media accounts if you want to see some real trolling. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. I've got to tell you our Geeky Science on the other side of the break, and I'll be picking up your phone calls here on Anything Goes Weekend. And welcome back. Eric in Mojave, California. Hey, Eric. Mojave. Wow. Is it hot there?
It's hot, Tom. It's hot. Luckily, we had a couple of gloomy days, but it's hot.
Okay. So what's up?
A couple of things real quick. I just wanted to piggyback on what Neil was saying. I was at a Taco Bell the other day, and customer walks in, and they say, you have to use the kiosk. And he's like, well, I don't know how to use the kiosk. And they're like, well, you have to get into the 21st century and use the kiosk. And he walked out. So they lost business because of automation.
Oh, interesting.
So I think a lot of the businesses need to start realizing that, hey, you know, and I told the kids that were working there, I told them, you know, the job you're saving could be your own.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
you know, don't push the automation too much.
You know, and the problem with those kiosks is that they're touch screens, which means that, you know, 50 people before you got there had taken the fingers that they had been picking their nose with 10 minutes earlier and touched the screen.
That's right. Let's push some COVID to everybody.
Yeah, and flu.
That's right. And then you were talking earlier about, you know, why the Republicans want to push abortion so much. You know, back when I was running in 2012, as you know, I got invited to all kinds of places because I was running as a Republican. So one of the little forums that I got invited to, Tom, crazy people, but like you were saying earlier about these people that'll go back to Noah to use it as a thing, they wanted to make it eventually that life begins at inception, so that any guy that sees a girl and asks her out and she says no, he can have her arrested for killing his potential child.
Jeez.
I mean, I was like, oh my God, I'm in La La Land. But,
well, that's not inconsistent.
Who knows how far they've evolved since then?
Yeah, that is not inconsistent with Catholic theology. I mean, the whole point of being opposed to birth control is that when you decide you're going to have sex, that's the point at which the child is, you know, has been preconceived, essentially, and you don't want to stop that. You don't want to interrupt that process.
And I was like, get me out of this place. But like I kept telling them, especially, the ones that were very pro-gun, I used to tell them, you know, gun rights and abortion rights are the same. It's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them.
There you go. So why did you run as a Republican, Eric? Are you a Republican?
Well, in the district up here from Lancaster, California, all the way up to San Luis Obispo is a very Republican, deserty district. And, you know.
So it's the only way to win in public office.
We all have, you know, little ranches and stuff. And I ran on a petition to get signatures to get on the ballot. Right. And I told everybody, the majority of the people who signed my petition, that's how I'll run. And we had, out of 3,000 signatures, we had like 2,800 Republicans sign.
Wow. Interesting.
So I was like, well, you know what? I got to run as a Republican.
We need people to take back the
I've
GOP.
always been an independent, and as soon as I lost, I went back to being an independent.
Yeah, but we need people to take back the GOP. I mean, I am supportive of rational Republicans. As much as I'm not a fan of most Republican policies, I acknowledge that we need
is this. They say the truth when they're talking, but they say it. What they're saying is, like Trump. What he says, he is.
Yeah.
When he says, oh, they're crooked, that's him. When he says they're lying, that's him.
That's called projection.
When he says the vote is rigged, it is. We vote on Tuesdays. That's a rigged election for working people. And like you were saying, mail-in ballots, that's the best thing to do against rigging an election.
Amen. Amen. Eric, thank you. Thank you for the call. And I hope you run again. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. It's 20 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. A real quick story for you. This is our Geeky Science for the day. This is an amazing study. This came out of Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and the Massachusetts General Healthcare System. And it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, no slouch organization, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And the title of the report is Sugar-Sweetened and Artificially Sweetened Beverages and Risk of Liver Cancer and Chronic Liver Disease Mortality. This was a study of 100,000 postmenopausal women as part of the prospective Women's Health Initiative study. And it followed a median of more than 20 years. 20-year-long study, 100,000 women. And what they found, and they were looking at liver cancer and deaths due to chronic liver diseases, including fibrosis, cirrhosis, chronic hepatitis, and other related things. And they note that roughly 65% of American adults drink sugar-sweetened or artificially sweetened beverages on a daily basis. 2/3 of Americans every single day. Well, this is what they found. The 6.8% of women who consumed one or more sugar-sweetened beverages daily had an 85% higher risk of liver cancer and a 68% higher risk of chronic liver disease mortality compared with those who had fewer than 3 sugar-sweetened beverages per month. Wow. So I guess the safe level of a sugar-sweetened beverage is like 3 times a month. Don't even think about drinking sugar-sweetened stuff every single day. I mean, this is incredible. It's an incredible study. So, anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. It's Anything Goes Friday. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm just chipping in and sharing your concerns about the 2024 election, in that I'm worried about people getting a chance to vote. And this is why I've kind of developed a concept of civil information. And I want to give a clear shout out to what happened in Ohio, because in that citizens got together to block a governance change. And I just wanted to point out how the whole process works, okay? Mm-hmm. And first it starts off with that most activists had pro-choice positions to begin with, and they became the civil informationers. Second, somebody figured out what the Republicans were doing statewide. Third, they started to share all that information locally, and eventually ended up with a statewide effort. It was organized from small to big, bottom up, not top down. The net result was that more people ended up voting. And it was really kind of organic activism. And I thought that I wanted to just share that and give them a big shout out and have that become a model for 2024. And of course, the term I'm trying to get into people's mind is civil informationing. And if it's okay, I'd like to give a shout out also to Ziggy up in New York, because he's doing what I do. And I have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@civil.informationing. And Ziggy, check that out. Anybody can check that out. Steal all my messages, T-shirts, all kinds of signs, all kinds of other things, and we can do it. I'm very concerned, Tom, that as we get more and more people thinking liberally or progressively, the Republicans are going opposite and just restricting our voting. So we've got, I think, more people to vote ahead, and they're restricting our system to actually vote. And the only way to deal with this is follow David Hogg, get out there, build the local communities upward.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. Thank you, Robin. Good on you. John in Sparks, Nevada. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to tag into your conversation you had with Representative Jayapal about rolling coal. There is a company called Sinister Manufacturing who is going to have to pay a $1 million
I saw that story a couple days ago, yeah. They got nailed.
Yeah, I had sent you that story.
Oh, okay. That's how I saw it then.
Yeah, the fine was for $500,000 and then another $500,000 to settle a civil complaint. And it might go up pending more of their exposure here. And they this company has been doing this for quite a while, and I thought it was pretty significant that they are being fined almost $1 million for making these devices.
Right, for violating the clean air rules was the rubric under which they were being charged. And you know, they were selling. Not only were they selling conversion, not only were they doing conversions on diesel pickup trucks, they were also selling kits where you could do it yourself. And I'm guessing this is going to be a real whack-a-mole thing. You know, as long as these, you know, members of the, well, I used to call it the small penis gun club, these weird, insecure men think that there's something cool about blowing poisonous smoke, you know, in the face of people driving Priuses and electric vehicles. You're not going to get rid of these devices. This is going to continue.
Well, they had sold 40,000 of these devices, and hopefully it's a message for other people not to do this.
Yeah, hopefully. John, thank you. Thanks for the call. It's amazing. Isn't it pathetic?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to blow some smoke in your face, buddy. I'll show you how smart I am.
That's pathetic. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, these pathetic right-wing snowflakes would really rather you didn't know. I'll be back with you. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one, too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann. from international trade policy to immigration policy to housing. We've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, when Volodymyr Zelensky became president of Ukraine, he was dealing with one of the more corrupt countries, a legacy of the Soviet time, with a number of very, very corrupt oligarchs who basically owned politicians. One of them, like Viktor Medvedchuk, was essentially the Rupert Murdoch of Ukraine. He owned a television network and a bunch of TV stations and was constantly pumping out right-wing poison and tearing people apart. And he owned a bunch of politicians. So, and this is the part most Americans don't know. Last June, a new law came into effect. It was passed the year before in Ukraine that basically says to the oligarchs in Ukraine, you can stay rich if you want, but you can't use your money to influence politics. No more oligarchs in politics. They called it de-oligarchization. Seriously. There's a whole piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Picking up your calls here on Anything Goes Weekend. Charles in Gold Hill, Oregon. Hey, Charles, where's Gold Hill?
It's in between Medford and Grants Pass on the I-5 corridor.
Oh, yeah, pretty country. So what's up?
Well, I'm worried about George W. Bush and Michael Reagan losing their status to Hunter Biden.
Status as what?
As they're thieving from the savings and loan and all this about Hunter Biden thieving from foreign countries.
Oh.
It just may overtake them.
Yeah. I'm wondering, if Hunter Biden got a special prosecutor and it looks like the worst he did was, got Burisma to put him on their board and pay him a bunch of money because he was Joe Biden's son. Why isn't there a special prosecutor for Jared and Ivanka?
Well, I don't know either.
I mean, they're saying that the big crime Hunter committed was taking $5 or $10 million. Jared and Ivanka made almost $200 million while they were in the White House. They got tens of millions of dollars worth of free patents when Daddy went over to China with Ivanka. Remember that?
Yes.
And then Jared led the cause on behalf of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, to stop the Trump administration's Justice Department from looking into the murder of what was his name now?
Khashoggi.
Yeah, thank you, Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter. And then not only that, apparently Jared Kushner took top secret information out of the White House, gave it to MBS about who was and who wasn't on MBS's side in the secession battle that was happening in Saudi Arabia. And MBS used that information to round up and arrest a whole bunch of his political enemies, killed a couple of them, tortured others, took billions from them, and took over the country based on what looks like a presidential daily brief that Jared Kushner smuggled out of the White House and took with him to Saudi Arabia. I mean, there needs to be a special prosecutor for this guy. And then he gets $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's not...
Oh, yeah, for his venture fund.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not because he's just, he's got a nice smile or something. I mean, if we're going to go after Hunter Biden for trading on his daddy's name to the tune of $5 million, what about Jared Kushner, who traded on his father-in-law's name to the tune of $2 billion? I don't get it.
Well, let's not forget that his venture capitalist experience is 666 Park Avenue.
Yeah, which was a complete failure. You're absolutely right. Charles, excellent points all. Thank you very much for that. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Your comments on Manchin kind of parallels what I wanted to talk about with Republicans and Russia.
Before you get to that, Larry, a quick question for you. Did you see the piece in today's Financial Times about quantitative tightening?
No, I didn't.
The Fed's balance sheet just dropped below $1 trillion. It's down to $0.98 trillion from $3 trillion before of mortgage-backed securities, treasuries, and corporate bonds. They are flooding the marketplace with debt instruments, which is going to raise the cost of borrowing because there's going to be more competition. And the piece in the Financial Times today is saying, uh-oh, look out. This might hurt the stock market even. This could produce a recession.
Everything that the Fed is doing, from when you look at it, it looks like they're trying to destroy Biden's economy.
I agree.
But with with Manchin, he's doing what Trump did. When you have a system, an organization that's failing, all it takes to rise to the top is just become a member and then make the biggest noise you possibly can, and just be the biggest loudmouth, the most outrageous person, like Donald Trump did. A Democrat took over the Republican Party, and he took over the Republican Party. Normally, when you were going into politics, you kind of work your way up. You get a degree, you get a license from a state that kind of certifies you that you are qualified to do something. And then you go on and you get a lower level of government, like Obama did in a state election. He won it. And then he won an election in the Senate, or he became a senator, and then he made it to become president. And there's a process that takes place. With Donald Trump, he did like what my mother did. She got a degree, and then Trump became president. But my mother didn't become president, but Trump became president from just having a degree. He was not certified by the state to be competent in anything.
Right.
The only thing he did get was he got that degree. That is extremely unusual, and that lets you know that the whole system of the Republican Party has fallen apart. And in that way, this Putin's cook, for one moment in time, it almost seemed like he was just going to go in there and take Putin's job.
Yeah, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Yeah.
And when your system is falling apart, even when it comes to your family, I've seen families fall apart where all of a sudden everybody's going to prison. The son is challenging the dad, and the Menendez brothers, they just killed their parents so they could take over their wealth.
Right.
Now they were top dog. That's when things are falling apart. When you start having these kind of situations where Marjorie Taylor Greene, all of a sudden now she's the biggest image in the Republican Party because she shoots her mouth off. And all of these people almost have one thing in common. They are corrupt, they are racist, and they are power hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your analysis is accurate, Larry.
From the Supreme Court, the Republicans from the Supreme Court all the way down to the school board members who are going in and fraudulently getting power in school, all from up and down the system, they're all corrupt, all going for the money, and they're all racist, and it doesn't take much. All they have to do is just. I saw that. I think I mentioned this to you before, where this. I was looking at this documentary where this chimpanzee group, where there was this little runt, grabbed some cans that were tied together by a rope, and he runs through the camp and scares everybody up the trees. He couldn't get laid if his life depended on it. But when he started scaring everybody else, all of a sudden he became top dog. And that's all it took.
Amazing.
That was all. That's Donald Trump.
And that's Donald Trump's story. Yeah. Look out. Those Mexicans are coming. They're going to rape you and they're going to kill you. Yeah. Yeah.
Making all that noise.
Yeah.
And then boom, he becomes president of the United States.
Yeah. Trump and chimpanzees. It's a reasonable parallel. Larry, thank you. Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so that's when you can tell that a system is falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
at least it's got a high level of rot in it.
Yeah, like when the boss man hires his son to be next in line in the company.
Yeah, yeah. Or when the president hires his son-in-law to run foreign policy, and then his son-in-law makes off with $2 billion. I got it, Larry. Thank you.
Decides he's gonna. Okay.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good day, Tom. Thanks for the great show and your Hartmann report today. In case anybody missed it, it's a must-read deep dive about the ongoing GOP war on voting. I think we all need to keep it in mind on a daily basis. And, my heart and thoughts go out to the people of Maui and in Lahaina, the second deadliest wildfire in U.S. history, in a summer of extreme fires, smoke, and heat. And, Tom, just like our gun violence crisis, thoughts and prayers aren't enough of a response. We need more action and mitigation, and declaring a climate emergency would be a good way to start. So, while we need to keep the pressure on President Biden to do the right thing and declare that emergency, in my opinion, the key to making that happen might be focusing our efforts on Kamala Harris. number one, she's from California, which is a ground zero place for the ravages of climate change. And number two, she's a lot younger than President Biden. So she personally and politically has a bigger stake in preserving a livable climate. So,
although I think Biden, has a lot of empathy and connection with his children and grandchildren and the generations they represent.
Well, I hope he starts drawing on that sooner than later. I don't know if Joe Manchin is holding him hostage. If Biden's worried about him being the no labels candidate, but as Russ earlier said, that guy has no popularity in the Democratic Party, so I don't know what Biden would be worried about. And also, Tom, with Vice President Harris, she could and should be the administration's champion for the youth vote on a host of other issues, starting with reproductive rights, affordable housing, cannabis legalization, and expanding the Supreme Court, to name just a few. Biden seems to be, he's done, his first 2 years were great. He's kind of backslid on the climate, a lot lately. And he seems to be part of that establishment Democratic thinking that's, there's a lot of inertia. And case in point, they're all endorsing this Henry Cuellar way before the election. They're all already endorsing him, all the Democratic leadership.
He's like a 20-year incumbent. It's hard for a party not to do that.
Yeah, but at this point, it's so far ahead of the election, and he's anti-choice. He's NRA.
Joe Crowley had the full support of the Democratic Party too, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sitting in his seat. This is not a done deal, but I'm with you.
Jessica Cisneros only lost by 300 votes to Cuellar last time. So I'm just saying that there's like this inertia in the Democratic leadership that we need to overcome. Blow that away. And thanks, Tom. I appreciate your time and show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's 46 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls here on Anything Goes Weekend in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the rest of us. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm just a little concerned that some of the younger listeners might have inferred from some of the earlier comments that there was something scandalous in the Carter administration involving Billy Carter. In fact, the only thing I can remember...
It was really kind of ridiculous. He had Billy Beer, He was trying to make some money on his brother's name, that's all.
Well, he liked beer, and in those days, I guess Republicans didn't care for people who liked beer. Now they put them on the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
But that's being out of the point. The Billy Beer was just a crass marketing stunt, a very indifferent lager that was created to offend the fewest palace possible. Mm-hmm. And that was the extent of the scandal in the Carter administration, as I remember.
Yeah, no, there were some Republicans who mumbled under their breath about Billy, but I just don't see. I guess Hunter trying to make a living on his dad's name is a little more crass, but basically that's what Billy was doing. That's what Richard Nixon's brother, what was his name? Robert, was it? Nixon's brother's name?
I don't remember.
I don't remember, but
never cared that much.
He was trading on Nixon's name in China, as I recall, or someplace. He was doing similar to what this is a 50-year-old recollection, but similar to what Hunter Biden is accused of doing. But what I don't get is why nobody is looking at Jared Kushner. If we're going to go after people for trading on daddy's name or daddy-in-laws, Jared and Ivanka should have 5 special prosecutors.
Yeah, but he only cleared $2 billion in today's Republican circles. That's paltry.
That's chump change. You're right. Yeah. Okay. All righty. Thank you, Mike. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. You get many calls from people that have health concerns or health issues, and I wanted to share with you a website of physicians that their approaches to prevent and reverse diseases with plant-based foods. And if you allow me, the name of the organization is a non-profit organization composed of hundreds of physicians. The website is Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, or PCRM.org, and they offer their services for free to the public. And in their website, they have tons of information about good health and nutrition and how to approach various illnesses or diseases and so on.
Yeah, I'm looking at their website right now.
Yeah, it's a great website, and and they have all clinical studies and everything is there. Yeah.
Yeah, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM.org. Ethical science, research. This is great.
Yes.
Health topics. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you. I mean, this is fascinating. I'm a big fan of plant-based food. It's largely the diet that I follow, and I think everybody should. Alfredo, thank you. That's great information. I do appreciate it. We will be back with more of your calls in just 60 seconds, Sean? Yep. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening to us. So here's a question for you. If you're going to run for president on the Republican ticket and you're going to run against Donald Trump, how do you run to the right of a guy who's an open and declared fascist? This is the real crisis that the entire GOP field is facing. Ron DeSantis thinks he can do it. He's actually trying to out-fascist Trump. In fact, he's doing it down in Florida. Trump wanted to create his own police force like Hitler's SS. DeSantis did it. He wanted to have his own private army like the brown shirts. DeSantis did it down in Florida, created his own private army. Trump wanted to shut down the fake news reporters. DeSantis actually proposed legislation. He couldn't get it through his own legislature to make it possible for him to sue people. I mean, this is basically fascism on steroids. And it's come to the Republican Party, and it's presenting quite a problem for them. I've got a whole piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. Check it out. All righty, welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Mike in Sherrilsville, Indiana. Am I saying it right, Mike?
Sherrilsville.
Okay, Sherrilsville. All right. What's up?
I got my own theory about James Comer, but about a month ago we had a Supreme Court case where a woman who wanted to make websites but was afraid that she was going to get sued by gay couples because...
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Creative 303 or whatever it is. Yeah.
So now we have Texas going to court because they might get sued because of all this navigational, everything was a waterway back in Noah's time, right?
Right, exactly.
As far as James Comer is concerned, he's only screaming about a cover-up is because you're a little premature to think if it's a cover-up. He's afraid he's going to be shown to be an ass.
Well, he has been shown to be an ass. The problem that we and the rest of the country, that you and I and the rest of the country have, is that when Fox News presents James Comer, they take clips out of context of him saying these, well, we've got proof. We finally got the smoking gun. Yes, it's the smoking gun. And they play that, but they don't play the actual testimony of the witness who said, no, there was nothing there. There's no there. You know, who said it right
They
in
never
front
come
of
up
God
with
and
a smoking
everybody.
gun.
Yeah, there you go. So, Mike, I'm with you. I got to run, though. Thank you for the call. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today? Happy Friday.
Hey, Tom. Hey, you see the report that President Putin is considering attending the G20 conference next month?
Oh, really? Where is it?
How he was going to get there. You know, he hardly travels out of the country anymore. And when he does by armored train because he's afraid to fly because his plane might be blown out of the air.
Right.
So I was wondering how he's going to get there.
Where is there? Where is the meeting going to be held?
I forget. Yeah, I looked it up. I can't remember it. I don't think you can get there by armored train.
Okay. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, he's.
If he did go there, he'd be treated as a pariah.
Is this the meeting that's in South Africa where they said that they were going to arrest him if he showed up?
Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, South Africa might be.
That's going to be interesting because South Africa is a party, a signatory to the International Criminal Court. We're not, and Russia's not. But so that means that Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, if I'm remembering his name right, is going to have to arrest Putin if he shows up.
Yeah, because there's an international arrest warrant out for him.
I guess he doesn't have to. He can ignore the warrant. But geez, that's going to be awkward. Huh. Okay. Well, by the way, how's everything going in Virginia, George? What do you think of my theory that the Republican nominee is going to be your governor?
Well, it's a possibility. You know, DeSantis is sinking like a rock.
Right.
You know, if Trump is indicted, you know, I think he's going to sink like a rock too. So it's possible.
Yeah, Glenn Youngkin.
Yeah, it's far away. You know, it's a year over a year off. But stranger things have happened in politics.
He's got the right-wing billionaires behind him. I think they're going to roll him out after Trump goes down in flames. But you know, we'll see.
Exactly. Well, keep up the good work, Tom, and I enjoy listening to your show.
Okay, thanks a lot, George. And Steve in Phoenix. Hey, Steve, I got 25, 30 seconds here. You got a quick one?
You got it. You bet. Speaking of Putin, I have to wonder, because he controls Trump, and Trump controls the Republican Party.
Right.
Our politicians have been, beholden to Putin and stuff. So anyways, I'm wondering if Putin isn't behind the razor wire stuff in Texas, the busing of the people up to the blue cities.
These are just right-wing trolls. You know, the back in the 60s, Southern governors were busing black people up into northern cities. It's just an old racist trick. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jay LeBlanc, Al Gorilla Rhythm, Connor Arroyo, and Carna Verde, all the fine folks who helped bring this show to you in our chat room over there on YouTube and everything else. Thank you so much to all of them. And thank you to you for letting our sponsors know, letting our stations know, supporting the venues that carry our program, and for listening and sharing the good word with your friends and neighbors. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great weekend.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online,
We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.